Hey everybody, it's Steve with another episode of Keep 'em Rolling. And let me begin by saying it is good to be back. It has been absolutely way too long. So for today's video, a huge treat for all of you. A number of years ago, I was introduced to a very exceptional collector in the world of World War II militaria, and I was able to tour his collection. And let me tell you, it was an honor because not many people get to see the collection in person. Flash forward to just a few months before COVID-19 really ramped up. He reached out to me. He told me that he'd been watching my videos. He liked what he saw, and he wanted me to come film his collection for posterity, which just blew my mind because, I mean, what an honor to be able to do this. And then he told me that not only did he want me to film his collection, he wanted me to share it on my channel with all of you. So that's what the next few videos are going to be. The first video, which is the one that we're going to do right now, is on his Japanese collection. It runs about 45 minutes in length. It's a little long, but I was trying to figure out how to cut it down, and I thought, we're just going to run through the Japanese all at once. Watch it all the way through if you want, watch it in segments, but I'm telling you that if you're interested in getting into collecting World War II Japanese militaria, there is just an incredible amount of information in this video that can aid you along that endeavor. If you're someone who just likes seeing militaria, the items are just amazing. I mean, just truly amazing. So, the collection, he's put this together over several decades. This is not something that someone went out and did last week. And it is so extensive that we are going to start with the Japanese portion. And then the next video will probably be the Russian NKVD portion from World War II, followed by Russia in general from World War II. And then we'll go into the German collection, which will probably take 2 to 3 videos, if you can believe that. And then on to US, and I believe there's British and Italian. I mean, there's so many. We're just going to do a video for each. So hang on for the ride. It's going to be wild. The last thing I want to share with all of you, if there's something you want to see up close, if there's something you have a question on, go ahead and reach out in the comment line, and then what we're going to do is at the end of all of these videos, we will go back and answer those questions and maybe do just a video on any questions, looking at things up close or what have you. So, on that note, let's get right into it. Enjoy, and once again, I know this sounds hokey. I know I'm kind of overemphasizing this, but I just want to stress what an amazing thing to be able to film it, but what an even more amazing thing to be able to share this with all of you. So, enjoy.
This is the beginnings of the Japanese collection that I've worked on for 60 plus years. We have 4 tunics on half mannequins. At that end, we have a junior NCO. He would be like circa 1943 to 45, and that would be some of the items that he would be carrying with him in the field: binoculars and a canteen. We have a Naval senior lieutenant service uniform that was commonly worn up to 1943 and still worn after that, but the Navy came out with a green uniform in 1943 that was more practical, for aboard ship and for fatigue duty. And next to him, we have a lieutenant of the Army Infantry. That was a uniform worn through the 30s and the invasion of China. And the shoulder straps and collar tabs, that particular pattern of insignia was replaced in 1938. And to the right we have a Naval senior lieutenant summer dress uniform. And in front of those uniforms we have 4 katanas, or samurai swords. The first one is a naval officer that was worn by naval officers throughout the war. And to the next we have a Army officer's sword that was actually acquired by a friend of mine at the end of World War II, we had a military hospital, and that was in the office of this doctor. And when they phased it out, he was able to talk the doctor out of it. And so I've had it for about 60 years. And to the next to that, with the green handle, is a samurai sword in civilian mounts, but it was carried as a military sword due to the leather sheath on the scabbard and the carrying ring. And next to that, we have a Army officer sword. That's a 1944 pattern, and it did away with brass elements, which were a strategic material. Frequently that's been called a naval landing officer sword, but they're really Army swords. This is the naval officer's cap of the 1943 pattern when the Navy went to the green uniform. And we have a Army helmet next to that. Nambu holster, for their service pistol. There's the naval dirk, which could be carried in lieu of the samurai sword by the naval officers, and a bunch of various bayonets, Japanese bayonets at the end down there. And in front of the swords we have ammunition pouches. These are for rifle ammunition, 7.65 and 7.7, Japanese canteen, and I guess that's it for this. All right, on the left we have a later Navy helmet. It has a spray-painted insignia on the front, which was typical for what they did in the latter part of the war. Next to that, we have a traditional Army helmet, and next to that, we have a naval Marine helmet with camouflage netting that they would, use twigs and whatever to put in that to help camouflage themselves. And on the next shelf we have miscellaneous Japanese medals and badges, and some with boxes that they were originally issued in. And the cups are sake cups that would be very often used for ceremonial type things. And the caps on the right are the traditional Japanese style of headgear that was used for service. There's a naval, or the Army is on the left. The 1943 Naval is the second, and that's the 1943 naval cap for an NCO. Has a single black stripe running around the cap, and the all-white one is a fatigue uniform that was used by the Army. And that particular cap, if it had two stripes, it would be an officer, and that would be a petty officer. And I think that's it for the Japanese in this room. That's a Japanese insignia that was used on vehicles, trucks, and cars. It would often be seen on a grill of a vehicle, and to my understanding, they were used on small crafts too. And with the anchor on it, it would be, associated with the Navy. So if it was on a car, it would be a vehicle that would be, used by the Imperial Japanese Navy. This is a traditional Japanese article that was made for a young man going off to war. This would be his, be on the wall of his home. The family would have a last meal in celebration of him going to war.
So about how long have you been collecting, like, specifically Japanese stuff?
Well, my father brought back a rifle and a couple bayonets and a few other things that, have been in our family since I was born. So, I guess probably 70 years, when I was old enough to appreciate what he had brought back. And I remember the bayonets when I was quite young, and my mother came home one day and was surprised to see that I was, playing with him with another neighborhood kid. So she became terrified and hid him from me for about 5 or 6 years, and then I found them in a closet, and that was the last time they ever got hidden from me.
Those are cool toys to play with.
Yeah, they were.
And then, just a rough guess, how many Japanese items do you think you have in your collection right now?
Oh gosh, maybe a couple hundred or more.
And are you ever going to stop collecting Japanese?
Well, if there's something that flies up in front of me that's a cool thing and I like it, it might become part of the collection.
That's what I like to hear. So.
Yeah. This is a Japanese naval compass that was used on small craft, like a PT boat or something like that. And it's a marble type compass with a fluid in it. And it has a separate light housing that can bring light to it, say into the dark. The case is Bakelite because if it was steel, that would affect the function of the compass. And this one probably dates from 1943, 1944 period. Okay, we have a mid-war Japanese bayonet with the frog that attaches to the belt, and this one is about the same period. It doesn't have a little ball at the end. The later scabbards, they did like this until they got into the last ditch, and then they were sheet metal. A little bit earlier war. This is a rubberized scabbard that was recognized as being used quite a bit by the Japanese Navy. And this is a earlier bayonet. This could go back to the early 1900s due from the type of grip that it has, and it has screw slots in the screws rather than rivets. And this is another early variation, but it doesn't have the hooked guard on it. And this is one of the lash ditch bayonets that has a wooden scabbard. And then also the blade doesn't have a blood gutter in it. That was just a faster way of manufacturing a bayonet. And I'll show you one with a blood gutter. And that's how that looked. This is on the earlier versions. And bayonets were an important item within the Japanese military, more so than other countries. They did a lot of specialized training with it, and thought of it as a particularly useful weapon.
And then that's the hook that you're referring to.
Yeah.
Is the sweep around, and
right.
You see it's missing there. And then the ball, you saw a nice example of
right
that there.
Yeah,
which is absent.
These don't have that. These are Type 14 Nambus. This was the most popular handgun of the Japanese military during World War II. At the top we have the early variety, which has a small trigger guard. They were nicely machined and finished, very well. And they decided to change the trigger guard to a larger one. They call that the winter trigger guard because with the invasion of China, they'd found that in particularly cold weather, the small trigger guard presented some problems with somebody wearing gloves. And the last variety is a little bit more faster manufactured. For instance, the nut, cocking nut, is solid knurled rather than this one is a bit more, machined. But anyway, they were always of good quality, and they were dependable pistols as long as the ammunition was good. Okay, this is a trench periscope that has was frequently used by the Japanese from a protected area. It has a device that can be stretched out to make its make this more visible by bringing up the magnification device on it. The eyepiece has a grid on it, so when you're viewing your adversary, you can, by the grid markings, you can call in an artillery strike on the position that you're looking at. And they were, a very commonly used item during the war. We have a Japanese Army rifle. It's a 6.5, and they came out with this in 1905. It's quite long, and it's much longer with a bayonet on it. With the Japanese being a fairly short person most of the time, that was, I imagine, was rather difficult to handle, but this is what they adopted. And also on this rifle we have a chrysanthemum, of which would indicate that it was property of the emperor. This is something that the Japanese did on all of their, or most of their rifles. And at the end of the war, the Japanese thought that they should deface this chrysanthemum because it would show shame if they surrendered, something to the emperor, to the Allies. So many of these things are defaced when you find them. And anyway, they changed the ammunition from 6.5 to 7.7 a little later, and this is a 7.7. As you see, they shortened it, and this particular rifle is called a Type 99, and it has what they call aircraft sights, and the thought was that you could flip up this sight, and an aircraft going overhead, you could shoot at it, and it probably wasn't very effective because they didn't use it for very long. And it also had a device to assist in stabilizing, for shooting, and apparently that wasn't too popular either. They did make them this way for a fair length of time, but there was realizing that, it wasn't all that worthwhile. They came up with this variety, which is another Type 99. It still had the aircraft sight, but they did away with that wire stabilizing apparatus. And this one, of course, is also a 7.7. And there was some later ones after this that were very crude, had wood butt plates, and sometimes they were rather unsafe to shoot because they were steel castings out in the backyard of somebody that wasn't too good on metallurgy, but I've shot some of those guns and they seem to hold up pretty good, but I wouldn't really trust them very far. This is a Japanese naval petty officer's tunic, and the name tag and depot tag that was in them when they came out, and the buttons on it are the NCO variety. The officer's button looks similar, except that the flower is moved further down the front of the anchor rather than being up high.
Quick question for you.
Yeah.
While the collar on that, it looks like it's a double collar.
Oh, yeah, it is. It's when these were being wear, there's a separate collar that would be used. This would be washed more frequently than the tunic. It had little studs on it to save the collar from wear, and of course if there was sweat, this little piece here would soak it up.
Kind of make it easier to clean then, I guess.
Yeah.
Wow.
And this is a naval fatigue tunic, and the rank device, this one here is a detachable one that connects to the button, so that can be used. It shows your branch of service and also your rank. And this is a naval cadet's tunic, aviation cadet. They had white ones and gray ones and a blue one, and they were considered to be non-commissioned officers, and they until you graduated from flight school. And I think that's about all there is to that one.
And then what is roughly just the age on these?
I would say 1940 on this one, and probably this would be wartime. I'd say 1942 on that one, and this one could be the same period. It could be worn to the end of the war. They were into green uniforms in 43, but they still use these white.
Is that stiffness just the starch in that uniform, or is that part starch, part material?
Yeah, it's probably starch.
Wow.
And
we don't do much with starch today, do we?
No, that's the depot markings and stuff like that. But remember, when I was a kid, my father, he had a couple sea bags that he had brought home, and in them was his work uniforms. He made chief in 45, so he didn't wear the work uniforms anymore, but they were denim belt bottoms and shirts, chambray shirts, and they were starched aboard ship. And I remember as a kid, I got that stuff out of the duffel bag, and the shirts were like iron. You had to rip them apart like this.
Wow. Because
there was so much starch in them. And he said, yeah, a lot of those shirts, they'd starch so much you couldn't even wear it, And he said you get some greenhorn in the laundry, and that's the way they
oh my goodness.
gave it back to you. Oh. So you were pretty much screwed. But anyway, I used up all of that stuff as a kid, and it all got thrown out. And unfortunately, that stuff that I mentioned seems to be worth a hell of a lot on the collector's market, because that stuff just didn't survive.
That's why, because it was starched and throw it out.
Right. This is a Japanese warrant officer's tunic. Yet, in many cases, the Japanese naval aviation were warrant officers. This is the insignia, and the blue edging indicate that he's aviation. They wore the regular Japanese officer's visored cap, and the slave insignia was 3 devices on the slave on each side. But that was a very common rank among the Navy amongst pilots. And we have next to it is a Naval Lieutenant Commander's tunic with the full regalia ribbon bar. This would be worn for dress occasions. And we have the collar tabs are that of a lieutenant commander, and also his slave rings are 2 wide and 1 narrow to indicate that rank, and that would be the naval officer's cap that would be worn by junior officers through admirals. They were all the same cap.
That's quite an insignia on that cap.
Yeah. And the sword, or the katana, is of the naval type. It also has a race skin scabbard, which was frequently used within the Navy. And it was either this or the short naval dirk that were used with this uniform. And let me get up and I'll come over a little bit. This shelf, we have a Japanese officer's police cap that was used throughout the war, and that would be their dress cap, and this would be a cap that would be worn for service duty. The pistol is a Type 94 Nambu, as they called it, and that shoots the same cartridge as the Type 14 Nambu, and a couple variations of grenades that they used, Japanese Army dog tag, and the armband is the Japanese police, military police, called kanpai, and they were not anybody you'd want to have any dealings with from their history, and standard Army enlisted man's cap. And the items here, we have Japanese samurai swords, or katanas as they're called, and we have a couple pieces of headgear. This one is the Emperor's personal guard, as they called it. They did have a division also, but that insignia is what would be the bodyguard of the Emperor. And the swords, we have a standard Army. This is a standard Army officer. And it's interesting about this one is the blade on it is kind of nice. It has an old fabled dragon which is carved into it. And it's called a dragon chasing the jewel, and that was well executed. Yeah.
You can't even tell. You can't tell if it's in the blade or sitting on top of the blade. It's just got that, it's like
optical illusion.
Yeah, that is incredible. My goodness. That is something else.
Now this one's kind of interesting. This is the standard early variety of the Japanese NCO sword, but this one is in remarkably brand new condition. I got this from a veteran. He was a sailor at the end of the war. He was at one of the Japanese naval stations, and he acquired this, somewhere in the area. And he was kind of a fastidious character. And while he was, during the occupation, he built a box to send this home, and it had all these little silk pillows in the box to protect it. And so anyway, and it had a separate lid that screwed on it. He painted it battleship gray, and stenciled all the information on the lid of the box, and it was nice to see it survive so well. And standard
Wow.
standard blade that's serial numbered, along with the scabbard.
Boy, that made no noise sliding
Yeah.
out of that. That is incredible.
Naval officer, and they had a ray, the Suba, this guard right here, has rays around it to emulate the rising sun flag of Japan, which the Navy used as their battle flag. And this was a sword that was used by the Japanese naval landing forces. It's a Navy hilt, but the scabbard has one ring on it. It's leather covered, so this would have been worn with the green Navy uniform. And another 1944 pattern Army sword. This is one of their last swords. Last ditch, as the collectors call them. It's a wood scabbard, wood hilt, and the fineness of the blade, was not at this time. This probably was made out of a chunk of old railroad track, or leaf spring from a vehicle or something like that. And this is one of their last swords. The mounts on it are quite simplified, and it's unusual that this one has a leather scabbard covering the scabbard itself. And again, the blade is not one of the real pretty ones that the earlier swords would have. And this banding on it, at the end of the war, the Japanese thought that they put a tag on it or identified it somehow with their name and address. They could get it back sometime. But this is a Japanese Army aviation pilot's uniform. This would, he has a life vest on that would be worn while he was out flying his plane. If he got shot down over the ocean, hopefully that would keep him afloat for a little while. But there's a tunic under that life vest, trousers. The holster is the Nambu holster, and that's a pouch right there. It has a bandage in there that might be used if he gets wounded. And the flight helmet is a leather helmet with goggles. The Japanese Army had that star insignia on the front, where the Navy did not use that. And this would be worn throughout the war, basically 1940 to 45. And this uniform is a Japanese Army captain. This is the Model 43 uniform, which was had added stripes and stars to the sleeve. You notice that the stars correspond to the number of stars that are on his collar tab. And the badge on his right breast is a commander's badge. He would be, that would indicate that he was a commander of a company, and because the company might have another captain being involved with it or some other officer. So if somebody came in within that company, that badge would, immediately he would be the guy in charge that you would want to talk to if that was your purpose. And it was traditional that the Japanese officers wore black boots. Brown was worn by sergeants. And the sword was his signature of the rank that he held as being an officer. That's why he would carry the katana sword. And that one, the tassel that's on the grip is kind of a different variety. Rather than having tassels that hung down, that was a simplified version, that because the tassels, in everyday use and in combat situations didn't last too long, so frequently you see that kind of tassel that's on the handle.
And is that a map case?
Yeah, that's a map case. It's under him, that was, carried by NCOs and officers with, papers that they had to deal with when in the field.
I like that uniform.
And
just nice and simple.
Next to it, we have a Japanese petty officer. That's a chief petty officer with later type insignias. You notice that the right sleeve has his rank, and that's a school insignia. It's on the left sleeve, and on the right sleeve it shows his rank.
Oh, I see. Okay.
And the cap insignia is the later style, which is similar to an officer's, but it's not quite as prominent.
Sorry, I was looking at the cuff.
Yeah, and the one next to that is the earlier version of a chief petty officer. The insignia on that is an oval with an anchor, which was done away with during the war. Now, he's an aviation pilot, and it shows his two insignias that indicate of his involvement with being a pilot and a Navy pilot.
Impressive. Absolutely impressive.
We have a Japanese Army tunic of a second lieutenant, and this was worn from 1938 to 1943. And at that time, in 1943, they added a series of rings and stars to the sleeve to denote rank a bit further than what this one shows, but this is the standard tunic worn up until that time. And this is also an infantry one from that device right there. These would be in different colors that would denote what their branch of service was.
Just an unusual button configuration, with the...
Yeah, they're normally metal, but the ones that on the flaps were smaller, and apparently the tailor didn't have any of the smaller buttons to use, so that's what they ended up using.
Nice tunic.
And this is a Army tunic of a senior private, has 3 stars on the shoulder straps, and this was kind of a transitional one between a lay-down collar and the earlier stand-up collar that had the collar tabs on it.
Okay.
They shortened the collar, and and still kept the shoulder straps for a couple of years or so before they went to the new style of uniform.
It's kind of an unusual color.
Yeah.
It's neat. I mean, it's not bad. It's just.
And this is a NCO tailor-made tunic of the Army, and this one has wood buttons on it, which apparently were easier to procure than metal buttons, because this was done by a private tailor, and they probably didn't have access to metal buttons, and so that's why they use wood buttons.
It's got quite the lining in there too, almost like a silk.
Yeah. And this is a Japanese Army senior private's tunic. This one has Bakelite buttons. Again, it's infantry, and that's probably a company number, one below that. Occasionally see that kind of patch, but most frequently they don't. There isn't one there.
That's neat.
And this is winter service. This is a heavy wool, and this probably would have, well, this was intended for use in China. And this is also a private's tunic, again wool, and less than senior private with these collar tabs. And this one has metal buttons. This is a issue tunic.
Now, would that be a little bit earlier because of the metal buttons?
No, I think
did they pretty much have metal throughout the war?
Well, yeah, they used metal throughout the war, but I think the one with the wood buttons is just because it was a private tailor. He probably didn't have access to the metal buttons. You know, during the war, everything was in short supply for him, I'm sure. And this is a Japanese Army shirt that would be worn under the tunic. This was for cold weather type situations. It has kind of a fleece lining in it.
Look at that. That is
and
amazing.
The depot markings.
It looks like a really comfortable shirt, though.
Yeah.
Fleece in there. I guess unless you're in the jungle, in which case.
Right. Yeah. And this is a Air Raid Warden's tunic. The rank that would denote that, or not rank, but the insignia, would be this and that patch. And no collar tabs were worn, by those people. But anyway, this would be Air Raid Warden. It would have been used throughout the war.
Well, everyone, I hope you enjoyed watching that as much as I enjoyed filming that. And remember, we've got many more coming, including Russian NKVD, Russia, Germany, United States, miscellaneous, and so forth and so on. So if there was something you wanted to know more about, if there's something you had a question on, please leave me a comment. We're going to kind of pool all those, and we're going to do a video at the end that answers those comments or looks at things a little more closely and so forth and so on. I also want to say one more time what an honor it's been to be able to go into this collection and film it and to share it with all of you. Truly amazing. And this gentleman, he is such a down-to-earth collector. You know, he's not Mr. Case guy or anything like that. He's the type of guy that when you're in his collection, you say, ooh, that's pretty cool. He's like, oh, here, take a look at it. You know, go ahead, pick it up, look at it. That's how you learn. Love that mentality. It's just so nice to see that, especially coming from a collector who is as incredibly knowledgeable, has the knowledge that this individual has. So, on that note, everyone, this is Steve reminding all of you to, well, keep them rolling.